I wanted to start off by asking you, I know you just got back from Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And can you tell listeners exactly why you were there?
Yeah, we go down there every year. The Digital Bits has a panel, Blu-ray producers. So I was down there with Bill Hunt and Todd Dugan from the site, and we hosted the panel. We had a lot of the big Blu-ray producers, Charles de Lauzirika, Cliff McMillan, and Brian Ward from Scream Factory and Chef Factory, Robert Meyer Burnett, Cliff Stevenson. I think that was everybody. And yeah, so we go down there and we find out what guys are working on and show some clips from upcoming things, and it's a lot of fun.
Is there now? This is something you do every year. Do you actually have some kind of input into suggesting titles to them to have released eventually, or?
Well, we can certainly put a bug in people's ear and make sure that they're aware of interest in titles, and there's always hurdles that have to be overcome with everything, legal issues, rights issues, things like that, but the more they know that there's interest in a title, the harder they'll work to get around those and overcome those obstacles. So,
So did you see anything that interested you that they're working on?
Yeah, there's we got to announce on our panel that Shout Factory is going to be releasing the complete Pee-wee's Playhouse on Blu-ray, and it's pretty interesting because that show was finished on half-inch analog tape, but it was shot on film, and Paul Rubens has all of the original material. So they're going back and using, for the first time, the original film elements to produce this disc. And they showed a little clip of the restoration, and it's going to look amazing. It's really impressive what they're doing with this show.
Oh, I mean, that's one of the greatest looking shows ever, not only in terms of just its entertainment value, which is extremely high too, but just the craft of it all. I mean, it was like, as far as the daytime Emmys went, I mean, it was always nominated every year for like 20 different things. So
exactly. The level of detail is going to be extraordinary. People are going to really be blown away by this when it comes out.
It's always had that show has always had like a very difficult experience. I mean, it's been very hard to see a lot of it on home video at all. Really.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
Wasn't it just a few years ago that they just first came out with it on DVD? I mean, it
wasn't all that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is going to be the complete series, and Paul Rubens is contributing commentaries and interviews and things like that. So it's going to be a great set.
That's a big deal. Do you recall any other things that are happening that are on the
a lot of the Scream Factory announcements that they made, I'm really excited about personally. They're going to be coming out with collector's editions of Darkman and Cat People and Assault on Precinct 13. And in 2014, they're finally going to release the Cabal cut of Nightbreed, which I'm really excited about.
Nightbreed. Now, was that the thing with Craig Schaefer and David Cronenberg?
Clive Barker directed it. Yeah.
Right. Which I've still never seen that film. I need to check that out, but I guess that's one of the reasons I haven't seen it is that it hasn't been really available.
Yeah, it's been hard to find, and it went out of print, and Warner Archive, I think, brought it back into print a while ago, but that was the theatrical version, which is heavily compromised, and that movie was really badly marketed when it first came out, because it was marketed as this sort of slasher movie, which it's not, and I really like it. The makeup effects are great.
I remember seeing the box for it or something on it one time that made it sort of look almost comedic, which horror comedy.
Yeah, and it's not that either. So it's good that it's finally going to get to be presented the way it was always meant to be.
Right. So that is great news. All of those titles are really good news. You do work with digital bits, and also and then later on we're going to talk about Jahnke's Electric Theater on Facebook, which any listeners out there, all you need to go is Facebook and look up Jahnke's Electric Theater. That is JAHNKE''S. And like that page immediately, because it really does give you, I mean, even today, you posted today something about a film called The Odd Job.
Yeah.
Which I had no idea existed, even though I know Peter Medak's work, even his 70s and 60s work and so forth. For some reason, that film totally had never registered with me. But can you tell the audiences what that film is?
The Odd Job is a very underrated comedy, I think. It stars Graham Chapman from Monty Python, obviously. It's one of the only really solo projects he did. Most everything else he did was Python or had Python people in it, like Yellowbeard. But The Odd Job was him alone, and it's about he plays a man who's suicidal after his wife leaves him, and he tries to kill himself and he can't. So he hires an odd job man to kill him, and then his wife comes back, and he changes his mind, but he can't convince the guy to call off the job. And it's really quite funny. Graham Chapman writes about it quite a bit in his book, A Liar's Autobiography, which is, I think, out of print, but it's a really good book. But he mentions that when they were making that film, the role of the odd job man was meant for Keith Moon, who the two of them were good friends. And apparently Keith Moon's drinking prohibited him from being in the film. But that's certainly an interesting what-if movie to think about, Graham Chapman and Keith Moon.
One wonders if that would even be, if that had happened, whether it would be available or popular now, but it's certainly something that, like a lot of the things that you highlight on Jahnke's Electric Theater, just day after day, there's something popping up there that says, yeah, my God, why isn't this on? Well, I imagine you've always been a movie lover since you know so much about it.
Oh, yeah.
Can you remember the first movie you went to?
Oh, boy. The first movie I have a memory of seeing is, and this might be, a manufactured memory that never really happened, but I seem to remember my mom taking me to see Alice in Wonderland, the Disney version.
Okay. And what's this? Did you grow up where there were drive-ins and so forth? Did you have an experience like I did, where I personally learned about movies by going with my parents to the drive-in, and they were actually pretty liberal in letting me watch whatever they were watching, with the exception of, any sex scenes that came up or whatever. They would tell me to close my eyes or whatever. But generally they were pretty free about things. So I got to see a lot of things at an early age that my peers didn't actually know anything about. But were your parents as open, or did they understand your movie love early on and let you go with it?
My parents were both theater people, so they certainly encouraged me to see whatever I wanted to see. There are only a few movies that I remember asking to see that I wasn't allowed to see at the time. Like, I remember asking, I wanted to see Jaws when it came out in the theater, and my mom wouldn't let me go see that, which I guess makes sense because I would have been 6. Perhaps. Probably some good parenting on her part, not letting me go see Jaws at the age of 6. But everything else, pretty much, my mom took me to see a lot of stuff. I remember her taking me to see things like not just movies that I wanted to see, like Star Wars and Close Encounters and stuff like that, but she would take me to see the Buddy Holly story and the In-Laws and things like that. So it really sort of broadened my horizons without me even knowing it. I got to, because, you know, when you're a kid, you really just want to see cartoons and science fiction movies and stuff like that. So I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to see the Buddy Holly story, but I was glad I did. So.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely like a kind of a family friendly movie anyway, really. So I mean, but it would broaden your sense of. I know that it broadened my sense of, you know, history and the history of music in particular, and of course, you know, just that great Gary Busey performance and so forth. So, I also spent a lot of time at drive-ins. Did you ever were you a drive-in person? Were there many, did you grow up in California?
I grew up in Minnesota and Montana, and we had drive-ins, but they were obviously only open in the summer. During the winter, there's not a lot of call for drive-in theaters in those climes.
Yeah. It's not fun sitting there scraping the ice off of your windshield while you're trying to watch the film.
But I do remember going to see a lot of stuff at drive-ins, really weird random double features. I remember my dad and I going to see a double feature of Airplane and Popeye. And to this day, I have no idea why those two movies were paired up, but...
You got to figure they thought, hey, Robert Williams is in Popeye. He's funny, and Airplane's funny. They're both 1980 movies. That's about it.
Yep, that's about it.
Yeah, my experience, you know, going to drive-ins was hugely had a huge effect on me, and then I started going to repertory theaters after that. And so I wouldn't imagine there were a lot of repertory theaters around that area in that time.
No. My broader self-taught film education really started with VHS. I mean, I to this day remember the first time renting a VCR because, you know, for about a year or so, we didn't own a VCR. You had to rent one. And it was one of those big ones that are like the size of a suitcase and one of those top-loading things. And I rented Life of Brian and The Road Warrior. And I watched them both over and over and over.
Rentals. That's pretty interesting. Life of Brian and Road Warrior. Those are two good ones. Definitely, Road Warrior definitely deepens like when you see it on the big screen. But first time I got a VCR was pretty late. It was like probably around 84 or so, and I demanded one. But to that time, a lot of my, and I would imagine this might have been true for you too. A lot of my other, besides going to repertory theaters, HBO and so forth, particularly HBO, was a big game changer for me. Would you concur with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when I lived in Montana, we didn't have cable because we lived out in the country, but we did get a satellite dish, and it was, you know, back in the 80s. The satellite dish that you got is like what they have on top of the CNN building, so we could get all of those channels. We got HBO and Showtime and the Movie Channel and Cinemax and stuff from the East Coast and stuff like that. So it was just
a lot of the films that we'll see that you know that you can go and check out that aren't available on DVD nowadays, and can, again, listeners can check out on your Facebook page. A lot of those films like are HBO sort of movies that were played endlessly, but are now somehow strangely not available.
One of my own personal most wanted titles that I would give just about anything to get released on DVD is Twice Upon a Time, the animated film. And that played on HBO
the thing that
constantly.
George Lucas produced it, right. Worked on it, yeah. Yeah, that was amazing. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's this. What was the process called? It was an innovative animation process called, I'm going to get it wrong, Lumage or something like that. But it was this sort of cutout animation, and it was about he was trying to steal dreams or something like that, and I haven't seen it in so long, it's horrible. But it was really clever and funny and completely unlike a lot of other stuff George Lucas has ever done, and it's completely disappeared now. It screened in L.A. about 2 months ago, I think, at there's a repertory house in L.A. called Cinema Family, and they do a lot of great screenings, and they did screen Twice Upon a Time about 2 months ago, but it's very rare for that movie to get shown at all anymore.
It's actually that is particularly strange considering the fan base behind George Lucas that this isn't available.
I think there's a lot of rights issues involved with that one too, because it does incorporate clips from other Lucasfilm properties like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars and things like that. Now,
I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but with a lot of films that aren't available, is it the inclusion of certain film clips or certain, even these days, you have to license the photograph or the image of somebody to include it in your film. So if the character has a David Bowie poster, you got to contact the David Bowie estate to see if it's okay or whatever.
Right.
But then of course there's music rights, which I think is probably probably out of all of them maybe the thorniest issue.
It's certainly the most complex. Music rights are really, really difficult and have hung up the release of a lot of movies. One of the ones that gets asked about a lot is American Hot Wax from 1978, the Alan Freed story.
Right.
And that I'm quite sure is strictly music rights holding up the release of that, because it's all rock and roll classics on the soundtrack. So that's a difficult one to sort out. So there's legal issues like that, and then there's also film elements, restoration. I mean, a lot of these movies are just not in good enough condition to be released. That's what held up The African Queen for so long. And that finally was restored and released on Blu-ray.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, is that really a case of, like, let's just say take The Odd Job, for instance, which we were talking about earlier. Is it the case that maybe there's not a film element around to actually get it, put on home video?
I think in the case of The Odd Job, I'm sure there are elements. I guess I shouldn't be sure. There's always cases where things are lost, but that movie is recent enough that I would be very surprised if they can't find something. With The Odd Job, I suspect it's just, studios don't want to release something if they don't think there's an audience for it. And Graham Chapman is a member of Python, so there's a Python connection, but he is sort of the most undervalued member of Python. And so there might be some fear that there isn't enough of an audience to support a release of The Odd Job.
Okay.
And then there's and some of the other issues, like producing bonus content and stuff like that. Warner Archive has sort of sidestepped that by releasing a lot of movies that would never have gotten released otherwise, and they just don't have bonus content because, what are you going to do? There's not a lot to say about some of these things.
I'm perfectly fine with that, aren't you? I mean, I just, in a lot. I mean, every year I get at least 10 of those off of Warner Archives, things that I want, that haven't been around.
I'm absolutely fine with that. As long as I can see the movie, that's the primary concern. And there are movies that that have been released on not so much Warner Archive, but some of the other MOD programs, like the MGM one, where MGM released their version of it, and then a while later, somebody like Shout Factory will release a better version. First one that pops to mind is Rolling Thunder, which MGM initially released as an MOD disc, and I was okay with that. You know, it saddled with some of the worst cover art I could possibly imagine. It sort of dares you to be interested in watching this movie, but it's a great movie, so I was happy to have it in any way I could get it. And then even happier when Shout Factory took over and said, well, we can do this better. And they did a great job with that Blu-ray. I mean, it looks amazing, and they were able to get Tommy Lee Jones and William Devane to sit down for interviews. So they really knocked it out of the park on that one.
Yeah, and it's an important movie, too. I mean, it's, not only just for the cast, but also the Schrader aspect of it, and then John Flynn, of course, is an important director, I think, too. So, and plus it's a movie that actually does have a pretty big cult following. So,
and I assumed that movie would have come out a lot faster, because after Tarantino named his short-lived distribution company after that movie, I thought there would be a lot of curiosity, and, well, let's check out Rolling Thunder. Let's find out what this is all about. But nobody seemed to care. And so it took forever for that movie to come out.
And, I do, before I start talking about the site and some specific movies on it and so forth, I want to let viewers know that you have a long history with working with Troma. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I do, yes. I started working for them 1999, I think, and I worked for them for about 3 years. I worked a little bit on The Toxic Avenger 4, and I wrote a TV show for them called Troma's Edge TV that aired in the UK on Channel 4. And I wrote 2 of Lloyd's books. I wrote The Toxic Avenger, the novel, and Make Your Own Damn Movie, which he has parlayed into a mini franchise of his own. So I'm responsible partly for the Your Own Damn Movie phenomenon that Lloyd has perpetuated for the last decade.
So do you keep in contact with Lloyd and touch base with him any these days, or?
Yeah, I've
so there's no animosity there.
No. It's almost impossible to have animosity towards Lloyd, because he's Lloyd Kaufman. He's a force of nature. You know what you're getting into when you sign up with Troma. So if you can't handle it, it's kind of your own fault.
He's been a guest on the show, and we know he definitely is a force of nature, because it was a very memorable interview. So getting to digital bits and your work on digital bits, and which is this a website that you helped spearhead, or?
Well, Bill Hunt created it and founded it back in '97, I believe it was, and it originally he started it as a newsletter, and then created the site, and then Todd Dugan joined him, and I actually met Bill and Todd through Troma. We were shooting some pickups for Toxic Avenger 4. Todd asked if Bill could come to the set and cover it, and so he did, and Bill and I met, and we became friendly, and they found out that I was a writer and asked if I wanted to contribute to the site, and I said, sure, why not? And they can't get rid of me. I've been there ever since.
As it says on the site, you've reviewed everything from AI to zombies, so that pretty much covers it all. You might want to go maybe farther and say Zulu, just to really cover it all. But and so from digital bits came the electric theater thing, which is, I assume, is that correct? I mean, electric theater was sort of an adjunct to that, and I assume that it started off as a column in digital bits, but then moved over to Facebook. Is that correct?
The electric theater has gone through a lot of different permutations over the years. It started off as a column with me reviewing theatrical releases, and then I started doing the most wanted stuff, and it started focusing more on that, and then moved it over to Facebook just because it was easier to do it on a daily basis and just slap up an image and keep it going that way.
Right.
And then I will occasionally go back to the digital bits and do a column sort of covering, here's the story so far, here's all the most wanted picks, here's what's come out, here's what we still need, that kind of thing.
It was only a few years ago, I mean, it really wasn't that long ago, when things like Warner Archives and Columbia's Archives, and I guess Paramount has one now too.
Paramount's got one through Warner Archive. Warner has taken over distribution from Paramount.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking of Columbia.
And I think Fox has one now too.
Okay, maybe it's Fox I'm thinking of. But I know that I've seen. But it took them a little while to figure out that this was a possibility. I mean, before that happened, did you kind of feel like when you were talking about films that weren't available on DVD, did you feel like you were kind of fighting an uphill battle in some ways?
Oh, for sure, yeah. There have been titles that I will focus on even now, and I'm like, there's not really an audience for this beyond half a dozen people, so I know full well that the odds of it getting a release are pretty slim. But the MOD programs have made it a lot more likely. Now I think there is a chance for all of these movies to come out. Before these MOD programs existed, the numbers that a unit had to sell in order to justify getting released were just too great, and
so a lot of these,
so a lot of these more obscure titles was almost impossible that they would ever get released, unless they were licensed out to a smaller boutique label like Criterion or Severin or Blue Underground or Shout Factory or something like that.
Have you discovered or read any numbers out there that say how popular the MOD programs are? Like what the sales are, or any kind of sales information at all?
I haven't seen any concrete figures, and one of the studios tend to keep these things pretty close to the vest. It's sort of like Netflix, where they say that Arrested Development was a success, and then somebody will ask them, well, how do you figure that? How many people have watched it? And I'll say, well, we don't have to tell you that. Just trust us. It was a success. Warner Archives is doing well enough that they've been around for 4 years now. So if it wasn't doing well, they would have closed it down by now.
They wouldn't. I guess they wouldn't keep. They add a certain number of titles every year, right? I mean, isn't it something like do you know what the average number of titles they add every year is?
I would say it seems like on average they release about 6 to 8 new titles a week. So. Somebody better at math than me could figure that out.
That's a huge number. That's a lot of movies. That's like 400 movies. So
yeah, and Warner Archive is branching out in Blu-ray now. They just did Greystoke. They've released Hudsucker Proxy and Death Trap. So they're doing, and they've expanded into the streaming with the Instant channel. So they're doing well enough to expand and continue with the program.
Isn't it amazing that titles as huge as those three that you just mentioned, like one's a Lumet film, one's a Coen Brothers movie, like, isn't it amazing that they didn't feel like there was enough interest out there to actually give them, like, full dead-on releases?
Yeah, it's a strange time for the industry because it's not. It's also a matter of compared to 10 years ago, there are fewer stores. There are fewer places to buy these things.
That's true.
Circuit City is gone. Borders is gone.
Does Netflix actually outfit? I don't have Netflix, so I don't know if this is true. But does Netflix outfit its holdings with Warner Brothers Archives films, or are those still just things that you can just buy right out, and they're not interested in holding any of those titles?
Well, Netflix, I know Netflix doesn't really have streaming rights to any Warner stuff anymore. But it wasn't like there was the huge issue a month or so ago where they lost 1,000 titles or something like that in one day, and people went crazy. But none of those were actually Warner Brothers titles. Their license on those titles had run out some time ago.
Right. Yeah, and I know that's a big deal from my days working at TNT. They license a lot of things from a lot of different companies, but
yeah.
They only have them for a short time. So it's the kind of thing that, like, people who don't know about that angle of the industry, like, maybe just don't understand. They just think that these movies are lost forever in some ways.
Right,
which I guess I can kind of understand that too, in some ways, that feeling as well. So getting to the movies that are listed on Electric Theater, and let me just tell listeners, it's, if you're like a real hardcore movie geek, like I know a lot of you are, and you don't know about the Jahnke's Electric Theater, you should really go and take a look at it. And I really like to just go into the photos part of it, and then go and look at the albums, and then just go through the photos one by one. And they're usually photos of the original poster art. Very rarely you very rarely have any problems finding the original poster art for a lot of this stuff.
I try to find the original poster art as much as I can. Yeah.
Right.
I'm a fan of movie poster art, so that's the biggest reason I do that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm a collector as well, and so forth. So I mean, like, yeah, I like seeing that stuff too. Not only because I like to see the art, but I also like to see all the people who are involved with the film, because that's the main thing that's gonna get me interested in it, is who's involved with it. So
right.
So that's really important. But also, I like your descriptions, because they're very clear on what they're about, and whether you've seen it or what you think of it and so forth. I mean, what percentage of these movies that you highlight on Electric Theater are ones that you've actually seen, and which ones are what percentage maybe would be the ones that you're just interested in?
I would say I've probably seen about 30 to 40% of them, and the rest are just things that I have heard about and I've always wanted to see, but I can't because it's not on DVD. So I want it out.
Mm-hmm. And do you when you're researching for a newer title or whatever, does it just come to you in some ways, in some kind of through the ether, or does it? I mean, what kind of research goes into it? I mean, are you on IMDb constantly or things like that? Or I was even going to ask you if you were. I was going to ask you if you were a collector of these old books. I think these are extremely valuable books, by the way. I've got all of the ones from the 70s, but that John Willis did this series of books throughout, even going so back as far as the 40s, I think, called Screen World, which every...
Oh, yeah.
The Screen World books, and it doesn't have a lot of writing in them. It's just photos from the movies, black and white, and but it's every movie released in that calendar year. So
right.
And it's just the director and all the above major crew members, and then a lot of the cast usually, and the running time and the year and the time of the year that it came out, and even and countries of origin and so forth. But those
right.
are really amazing books. I think those
those
are
terrific. I remember those from when I was in college. I worked in the library system, and a lot of the libraries that I worked in had all of those, and so I remember going through those. But in terms of how I pick the movies, it's a combination of things. I mean, sometimes it'll be somebody's birthday, or there'll be an upcoming release that will spur me to remember something that's not out yet. But other than that, I do have books that I use. I'm a huge fan of Danny Peary, so I use his the Guide for the Film Fanatic book constantly, and the Cult Movies books, and the Cult Movie Stars book. Well, that's
something that we should touch on, is the Danny Peary discussion. He's as we've talked about, us personally, he's absolutely, to me, like one of the greatest film critics I've ever read. Like,
I absolutely agree with that.
just straight up front, one of the greatest, one of the breeziest film critics, smartest, most insightful, most concise, and just fun to read. I mean, with those Cult Movies books, which were the first books that I remember him doing, and then with a Guide to the Film Fanatic, and then also even alternate Oscars too. All of those books are just some of the absolute best film criticism that you can read.
He's all of those things that you just said, and he's also very inclusive, which is something that a lot of film critics aren't. That's one of the reasons I go back to that Film Fanatic book over and over again, is he says in the introduction, you're not going to like all of these movies. Neither do I. That's okay. But if you're really interested in film history, you should watch them. You should be aware of them. And he makes his case for, even when he doesn't like it, he makes his case for why this is significant, why you should pay attention to this. And he holds classics like Casablanca and Citizen Kane in the same regard as cult movies, like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and B movies, and even porn. I mean, he's the only film critic I've ever read who acknowledges that, yes, if you're looking at the history of film, porn was a big part of it in the 70s, and you should be aware of Deep Throat. That's pretty impressive.
And Bradley Metzger and so forth.
And Bradley Metzger.
So, and Joe Sardo and so forth. But I completely agree about his inclusiveness. His sense of inclusiveness really had a tremendous impact on me when I first got those books when I was in the 80s. Those Cult Movies books, they really defined what a cult movie really is, which is it's a movie that appeals to a small group of people who will go and see it no matter what, no matter where it's playing. And will turn out in droves, and there's actually like a fan. I mean, to include Citizen Kane, is as a cult movie in the book, it seems weird, but it's true that it is in large part a cult film.
I think he also says in the introduction to the Cult Movies book that, I mean, if you think about it, every movie is a cult movie in some way. I mean, Star Wars is a cult movie. It really is.
Yeah, or Gone with the Wind,
Yeah, people have decided to, shape their lives around the teachings of Star Wars, so that's pretty much a cult movie. But even now, The Sound of Music is a cult movie. I mean, they've got sing-along screenings of The Sound of Music where people dress up and sing along. And it's not my idea of a good time, but a lot of people do it. So The Sound of Music has become a cult movie. Go figure.
Yeah. Yes, they had one of those. I went to the sing-along for it up in New York at the Ziegfeld, and I was kind of astonished at how many people were really singing along with the movie.
Yeah,
I was like, wow, this is weird. That was the first and only sing-along movie experience that I've ever gone to. I've never gone to the Grease one, or I guess there's been a few others, but I
remember the Grease one.
I mean, even when you go see Rocky Horror, I don't think people sing along with the songs, except when they're in front of the stage and so forth. But But anyway, I think that's fascinating too. So, in the annals of Electric Theater, which has been on Facebook now, it's had a Facebook presence for how long?
That's a good question. I would say 3 years.
Maybe about 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years, yeah.
Yeah, going on to 4, I think. Well, actually, let me go back. Let me go back. I do want to say one other thing about Danny Peary here, and this relates to something that you're working. Well, I don't know. Are you working on the documentary about him, or is it Brian Saar who wants to be working on that?
Brian is. He's asking about it.
Has he asked you? Yeah, Brian Saar. Just for listeners. Brian Saar does a really great blog, which I actually contributed to today, and Adam has contributed to in the past. His blog is called Rupert Pupkin Speaks, and it's also kind of like an adjunct to kind of like a place where people can go to find out about sort of forgotten film history and to broaden their horizons. In case you're just, I always go to Electric Theater and to Rupert Pupkin Speaks when I feel frustrated with the fact that there are not enough great movies coming out today. And also when I get frustrated over the fact that maybe I've seen everything that's great. The only thing I have to look forward to is the future of today's movie industry, which also feels bleak to me. But Brian Saar has actually expressed interest in doing a documentary about Danny Peary. So he has mentioned that to me, and I certainly hope that he can make that happen, because Danny Peary really needs to have more of a spotlight on him than he does. Danny Peary has become like a code word amongst hardcore movie buffs. It's like you can tell people really know their stuff if they know who Danny Peary is, because people just immediately know those books and they light up. They're like, "Ooh, you've got those books too?" Yeah, it's like a club, the Danny Peary Secret Society. I've gone through those books personally so many times that I've had to rebuy them over and over again because they fall apart and everything. And I always wish, God, I wish they were in hardback. I wish I had just a whole collection of them in hardback, but most of them were softback books, at least as far as I know. So in the annals of Electric Theater, what are some of the titles that are out there that you are most, and I have my own list too here, but and we always like to end the show, Movie Geeks United, with kind of a list kind of thing, so we might as well do that here. What are some of the movies out there that you just, that you would just say, besides Twice Upon a Time, are in the top of your on your top of your list for things that you just got to see get released?
Well, the one that has probably gotten the most response on the Electric Theater page and that people ask about time and time again is probably Song of the South, which, I mean,
easily. Yeah.
It's I don't want to say it's never going to happen because stranger things have happened, but that's a tough one. And the frustrating thing with Song of the South is that there was a window of opportunity that Disney had where they could have put it out when they were doing those Walt Disney Treasures limited edition tins.
Mm-hmm.
Those were aimed at adult collectors, and if they had released Song of the South in that format, nobody would have batted an eye and everybody would have been happy. But then they stopped doing that line, so now that window of opportunity is gone. So I'm not entirely sure if or when that movie will come out, because Disney's really one of those all-or-nothing studios, because every time they re-release one of those animated classics like Snow White or Pinocchio, they promote it like it's a brand new movie, and they want to hit every single audience, and they just can't really do that with Song of the South at this point.
Right. Yeah, that's. I mean, I remember singing Song of the South when I was a kid, and I actually really liked it. And of course, the star of the film, James Herbert, is that his name?
Yeah, I think so.
James Herbert won a special Oscar that year for his performance in that film.
Right.
So, and I mean, just it's interesting, you know, it just shows you how thorny an issue race is in the country. It just continues to control some of aspect of almost everything out there, and movies are definitely not immune to it. So, what are some other titles that either your fans or that you really want to see out there?
Personally, some of the ones that I would most like to see are King of the Hill, Steven Soderbergh's movie, which I think is...
That's not available?
It's not.
That's crazy.
It's one of his best movies.
It is.
I would put it right up there with Out of Sight as his crowning achievement, and it's not available. It's crazy. It was streaming on Netflix for a while. I don't know if it still is, but it's not on DVD. And also from Soderbergh, Kafka, which is going to come out. He has confirmed that he is restoring it for Blu-ray, but it's
doing like a recut of it, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he's recutting it, and I read that he's going to, when it does come out, it's going to include the original theatrical version and his new reconsidered version. So I'm glad he's doing that, because I really, even when it turns out well, it drives me crazy when you can't see the original version.
Yes. Yeah, that's I despise that. That's why whenever any kind of director's cut comes out, I go, because I'm like, I know that everybody's going to start thinking that this is the version that needs to be seen, when director's cuts don't always work that well. They don't work quite as well as the originals. I mean, I'm pointing out, you know, two obvious ones, I think, which would be, you know, the Peter Blatty version of William Peter Blatty version of The Exorcist, which The Exorcist was fine the way it was, and also Donnie Darko, Richard Kelly's Donnie Darko, which doesn't succeed as a director's cut, but also, you know, even Apocalypse Now Redux, you know, is something that the movie was better the original way.
I think the one that annoyed me the most was The Warriors, when Walter Hill went and did his director's cut of The Warriors and includes these weird comic book transitions, and it's like, what are you thinking? This is awful.
He messed the movie up. He completely ruined it.
So
that's just frustrating. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. You need to see the original if they're gonna mess with them that radically. They must put out the original as well. Let me just give you some of the titles that I really am dying to see on make it. And some of these are ones that you've included before. In fact, I would say most of these, but some maybe you've included all of them, and I just haven't seen them. But have they ever come out with Wicked on anything?
No.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah, that I have included that one in the past, but it's not come out yet. No.
And Wicked is the only movie for a long time until maybe this past decade, it was the only movie that was done completely in split screen, a murder mystery. It was done in split screen.
They called it like Duo Vision or something like that, I think.
Duo Vision, exactly. I mean, since then we've had things like, Time Code, and then there was that one really crazy one about the girl that I can't remember now, like the Tracy Diaries or something like that. That was really insane. Where there would be like 16 different, sometimes like 15 different images on the screen, at once. But another film that I'd really like to see, and I've always thought that this was being withheld because not only of music rights, but also because maybe there's anything that like race related subjects. Another sort of crazy political issue as far as releasing films is, to me, like when they have a film that's about children, and it's particularly about children, who are being abused or going through some very tough times. And in this particular case, the movie is called Streetwise. It's a documentary from the mid '80s.
Yeah,
about street kids.
That's a really
Seattle.
powerful movie.
Incredibly powerful film, but I was surprised to find that it's out there. It's nowhere. It's just not available. So,
and that is possibly a music issue because it does use Tom Waits songs quite extensively. Another movie that's one of my own personal holy grails for DVD is Big Time, which is Tom Waits' concert film from '87 or '88. And I'm just a huge Tom Waits fan in general, but it's a really interesting concert film. But that one's not available.
A couple of other concert movies, or music-related movies that I would assume are fighting the same battle are Laurie Anderson's movie, Home of the Brave.
Home of the Brave, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is also pretty extraordinary. There were a few concert movies that came out in the wake of Stop Making Sense that tried to redefine, the realm of the concert movie in some ways. And both Big Time and Home of the Brave are one of those movies. But also the Decline of the Western Civilization series is something that's something that you would just think, people would just demand to get out because there's so much fandom around, the punk scene, and then of course the metal, the metal one that was really
the metal years.
Yeah,
and those are really, really good movies, and it's a shame that those aren't available. And the big sort of concert film that isn't available is Let It Be, the Beatles.
Oh yeah,
and that's not a rights issue. That's the fact that Paul and Ringo don't want it released.
Although I read somebody saying recently that they had talked to Paul about it, it was one of the first questions. They only got to ask him a few questions, and he said, "No, we'll do that one of these days." So
every so often, like every few years, they'll come back to it and talk about maybe finally releasing Let It Be, and I'm positive at this point it will happen one day. It's just a question of when. I mean, the Beatles have a finite number of things that they can release over and over again. So Let It Be is kind of the last thing on the checklist.
Right.
Now Health has been released on Blu-ray. I guess Hard Day's Night still hasn't come out on Blu-ray yet, but I'm sure it'll come out.
I hope so. I'm sure it's extremely painful for them to ever watch it, but that shouldn't keep them from letting us watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Another film that I'm incredibly interested. I mean, I've got a list here, and I won't go through the entire list, but it's just amazing to me that some of John Sayles' movies, like especially the one that I've got here, City of Hope, which has this incredible cast in it, and is actually one of his very best movies. Mm-hmm. But that too is nowhere to be seen. I guess John Sayles doesn't have much of a culty kind of thing going on, but certainly.
Which is weird. I always thought he did, but apparently not. Because there's so many of his movies that.
It seems like a cult that shrank at least a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a shame. But the City of Hope is not available at all, and a lot of his other movies have been released, but very badly. The DVD version of Matewan is terrible. Just terrible, and it needs to be re-released. But
that should be a Criterion movie.
Matewan really should.
I mean, I don't know if they've released it. Did they release Return of the Secaucus 7 a few years ago? Did Criterion do that, or am I making that up?
they may have done it as a Laserdisc at one point. I don't think they've released it on DVD or Blu-ray.
Okay, all right. Well, they should really get on to just checking out a lot of John Sayles movies. But I would put City of Hope up there. Yeah, I would, especially these days. I think it really has something to say about where we're at right now. And so I would love to see it. I do see that it's available on Amazon to watch. So that's good. At least it's out there in some way. And I suggested a couple of movies to you. Marvin and Tide was one of them, which you were kind enough to feature, and that's a film that was shot here in Atlanta. And I actually profiled today on my article for Rupert Pupkin Speaks, so you can read about it there. And then also a film called Boardwalk, which was part of that whole kind of New York City vengeance kind of movie that came out in the wake of Death Wish. There were tons of these movies. I think you feature one on your called Fighting Back with Tom Skerritt.
Tom Skerritt, yeah.
But also, there was a film called Defiance that was done by John Flynn with Jan Michael Vincent and Danny Aiello. That's actually pretty good too. But Boardwalk is with takes place in Coney Island and focuses in on an elderly couple being bedeviled by the crime in the streets, and it's Lee Strasberg and Ruth Gordon as a couple, and Janet Leigh is in it as playing their daughter, and then even Lillian Roth is in it, who was a huge star back in the 20s and 30s, but disappeared for years and years. She even had a movie made about her with Susan Hayward and so forth. I'll Cry Tomorrow, and then she just disappeared. So she reappears in this film for, I guess, the last time in her career being in a movie. But that movie just is one of those HBO films that I just couldn't believe when I saw it.
Ever since you mentioned that to me, I've been very curious to see it because you recommended it to me for the Electric Theater, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And so I started to research it, and I went looking for the poster, and I was like, this can't be the right poster because it's this weird Hirschfeld character, and it was like, this in no way matches the description that Ed gave me for this movie.
Something tells me that some executive saw the film, and it's amazing to think of a time when executives could see a movie and say that they hated it and still release it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, like you don't see a lot of that these days. They kind of hedge their bets way before it gets to that point. But something tells me like an exec saw the movie and said, this movie is a downer, the downest of downers. Can you just make me something that looks happy so that people will think that it's a happy comedy movie with two lovable old coots in it? You know, it's not quite that movie. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, there's so many films on Electric Theater that I love. You know, that you highlight Ballad of Gregorio Cortez with Edward James Olmos. About Mrs. Leslie is another one. Probably one of the few movies that Shirley Booth did after she won her Oscar in the 50s for Come Back Little Sheba. And it's actually better than Come Back Little Sheba. It's actually quite an effective melodrama. And Fabulous World of Jules Verne, which is one of the great animated movies, or like partially animated, mostly animated, but it has a little live action mixed in with it, which makes it even wilder to watch because it's. Have you ever seen that film, by the way?
I have not. No, it's something that I have heard about for years and years and years, and have always wanted to see it. But
yeah, it's a Czech filmmaker named Karel Zeman, and
right.
Anyway, he makes all the images in it look like old, you know, turn of the century engravings, but they're moving and they actually have depth and they're just extraordinary. He also did I think he did one. I haven't seen it, but I think he did one for that was about Baron Munchausen as well.
Yes, I have seen that one, and that's pretty great. So,
is that done in the same way? I haven't seen it, so.
It's a little different, but it's well worth checking out. And that's actually when I first heard about him and his work was after Terry Gilliam's Baron Munchausen came out, and he in an interview he mentioned the Czech version as an influence, and certainly the still images I've seen from the Jules Verne movie are. But it's a pretty clear, direct influence on Terry Gilliam's animation style.
Yeah. And, you know, there was another film that I saw when I was a kid. This is the kind of parents I had. They took me to a film. But remember, I was a kid that asked my parents when I was 10 to take me and go see Taxi Driver, and then I ended up falling asleep in the middle of it because it was one of the few movies at the time that we went to go see at a four-wall theater because it wasn't playing at a drive-in. And something about being in a four-wall theater, I think, made me really sleepy, so I just zonked right out. And I didn't see it until I was like 15 years old. But there was a film I saw at the drive-ins back in the mid-'70s called Shoot with.
Yes, that's a Canadian movie, I believe.
Yeah, with and Peary writes about it in Guide to the Film Fanatic too, but it's with Cliff Robertson and Ernest Borgnine, and they're gun enthusiasts who go out on a weekend hunting trip and then actually encounter another group of hunters, and they start sort of a mini war amongst each other in the middle of the woods, which is another, you know, very incendiary kind of movie that could be released these days, and so maybe that's one of the reasons that we don't see it. Even though it has those stars in it.
Very possible.
Yeah.
And some of the other movies that need to come out are, Until the End of the World has not been released, which is kind of astonishing to me. And that's one that there's the Holy Grail 8-hour director's cut version that allegedly exists, and people are holding out hope that they're going to get that. But frankly, let's just have the movie that exists, and not try and hold out hope for the dream version.
I didn't even know there was that dream version. Really was. It was considered. I mean, that's Wim Wenders' movie, right? The Wim Wenders movie with William Hurt.
William Hurt.
That's kind of a cult movie in and of itself too. People who've seen that movie really love it. And I have to admit, I've only seen little bits and pieces of it, but yeah, I would like to check that out. Just a regular film,
Yeah, at this point, more people know the soundtrack than know the movie itself. So
exactly, that's true. Because it's a U2 soundtrack, right? Or am I right about that? Who is the
U2 did a song for it? Yeah, U2, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Talking Heads is on there. It's one of the best soundtracks that has been released, in my opinion. But the movie itself is MIA.
Yeah, that's again really strange to know that there's so much stuff out there. But I mean, this is the kind of conversation that could go on forever, because going through the voluminous number of movies you have on Jahnke's Electric Theater, it's just kind of overwhelming. Like, you could spend hours upon hours just flipping through those things and going, "Oh my God, where is this?" Now it's really interesting too that you also have a section on the Electric Theater, an album in there that's movies that have been captured, or how do you put it? That they've been they're no longer most wanted. They have now been captured. So. And so, when you go through that, does it make you feel good about the possibilities of things being released?
There's a lot of movies that I have been able to move into the captured section that surprised me, that I thought were long shots to come out at all, much less in really nice editions. And the fact that Santa Sangra is one of them that I thought was a long shot, and Severin came out with this wonderful Blu-ray edition of it. It's fantastic. And Island of Lost Souls, when Criterion did that, that's a beautiful disc. But all of these are, at the time when I included them as a most wanted pick, it seemed unlikely that they would get that kind of treatment. So to be able to go back into the captured album, and now it's I just updated it the other day, and I think it's got almost, or maybe over 200 titles in there now. So, I mean, it's having some kind of impact. That's surprising to me. I know that people from Shout Factory follow it, and people from Warner Archive follow it. So these guys know their own product. They know what they want to do and what they don't want to do. But being able to call attention to these things and proving to them that, yes, there is an audience for these movies, please release them. I think that's a useful thing.
Incredibly useful. I mean, that's the reason, I really wanted to talk to you, because I consider you kind of a hero in that respect, and just a hero and just been eagle-eyed enough and knowledgeable enough to highlight these things is just enough. But the fact that you have some kind of effect on whether things get released is just another level to it entirely. So, I want to thank you for those efforts, and I'm sure a lot of film fans out there will want to thank you as well.